Hey everyone! So this is something that happened recently and I've had mixed feelings about it. I thought I'd vent here and maybe get some outside perspectives. My name's Leo. I'm 17 and in just a few weeks I'm supposed to be starting college. I had a plan. I applied to several good business schools hoping to get accepted somewhere out of state so I could finally put some distance between myself and my family. Not that I have anything personal against them, but, well, I needed a change. And I didn't think they'd mind me going either. Things were going smoothly. I had good grades, decent extracurriculars, and even a few friends who were confident I'd get into some of the better schools. One of them was my dream school, which was Stanford. Everyone knows it's tough to get into, but I figured it was worth a shot. Even if I didn't make it, I wanted to know that I at least tried. And honestly, getting accepted there would have meant the world to me. But here's where everything went wrong. While I'd been working hard to make sure I could secure a good future, my parents seemed to have other priorities. Specifically, they were worried about my younger brother, Nick. Nick's 15, and to put it kindly, school hasn't been going well for him. He's failed classes, missed assignments, and hasn't been able to focus on academics. Not that he's trying all that hard, in my opinion. Whenever he's home, he's more interested in impressing his friends than studying. My parents, however, seem convinced he's struggling due to something deeper. They'd been taking Nick to see various specialists recently to check if there might be a learning disability involved. This all started after his school counselor called my parents and suggested they look into his academic struggles. The counselor even mentioned that if things didn't change soon, Nick might only be able to get into a community college after graduation. She even brought me up as an example of a more academically focused sibling. The idea that Nick might end up at community college really spooked my parents, and they seemed to take the comparison to me pretty hard. Now, let me be clear, I wasn't too invested in my brother's situation. He and I aren't close, and we've never had the best relationship. So, as far as I was concerned, whatever was going on with him was between him and my parents. I was focused on my own future, and I didn't think his issues would affect me. How wrong I was. Fast forward to a few weeks ago when I started hearing back from the colleges I applied to. The good news was that I'd been accepted into most of them, which felt amazing. But I was waiting, holding out for Stanford. Usually, even if a school rejects you, they at least let you know. But I hadn't heard anything from Stanford. No acceptance, no rejection, not even an email. I checked my application portal, but my status had completely disappeared. I looked everywhere, even in my spam folder, but nothing. I decided to call the admissions office, thinking maybe there was a glitch or something. When they called me back, they said, "We received your email to withdraw your application, which is why we haven't followed up." I was floored. Withdraw my application? I had never sent any email like that. I tried explaining, telling them there had to be some mistake, but they confirmed that they'd received an email supposedly from me requesting to withdraw. They'd gone ahead and cancelled my application, assuming that's what I wanted. I couldn't wrap my head around it. The idea that someone would sabotage my chances like that felt insane. At first, I thought it had to be Nick. He's never been happy about me doing well and has always tried to bring me down. But the more I thought about it, the less it made sense. Nick can be a jerk, but he's not exactly sneaky. And if he'd done this, he'd probably be rubbing it in my face by now. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling, so I confronted him about it. When I brought it up, Nick looked genuinely confused, but I didn't care. I was fuming. I grilled him and he got defensive, yelling back that he wouldn't even know how to access my application, and if anything, he'd have withdrawn all my applications just to mess with me. I won't lie. That made me see red. I was already on edge, and his arrogance just tipped me over. We ended up in a shouting match that turned physical. Our parents heard us and rushed in to break it up. I must have looked like I'd lost my mind because I was so angry I could barely think straight. It was like this pressure had been building up in me all day and it finally exploded. My dad held me back and my mum looked at me, eyes full of this weird combination of guilt and worry. That's when she dropped the bomb dot. "It was us," she said quietly. "We withdrew your application." I froze. It felt like the room went dead silent as I tried to process her words. My own parents? They'd gone behind my back and sabotaged me like this? I couldn't believe it. Betrayal doesn't even begin to cover how I felt at that moment. We just stood there, me staring at them, them looking anywhere but at me. until my mum broke down and started explaining. Apparently, my parents had access to my email from years ago when I'd used my dad's laptop for school. When I got my own laptop, I never logged out on his, and I guess I'd forgotten about it. That was how they accessed my application. She explained that they hadn't planned on meddling with my college plans until Nick's counselor got them all worried about his self-esteem. They were so afraid of what it would do to Nick if I got into Stanford while he was struggling. They thought that if I went to a prestigious school like Stanford, it would be too much for Nick to handle, constantly comparing himself to me. They feared it would damage his mental health. For days, they went back and forth on what to do, and eventually, they decided the best way to protect Nick was to make sure I didn't have a chance to get into Stanford. They thought that if they withdrew my application without telling me, it would make things easier for everyone, and I'd never know. My mum kept apologizing, saying they hadn't thought about the effect it would have on me and that they were just trying to look out for Nick. But her words were hollow to me. They'd destroyed my chance at my dream, all to protect my brother's ego. I couldn't even look at them anymore. Without a word, I turned and walked out of the room. I went straight to my room, locked the door, and started packing. I didn't want to stay another minute in that house. They kept trying to talk to me, to apologize, but I was done listening. Once I had everything I needed, I called a cab and headed to my grandparents' place. They're my dad's parents, and they live nearby, so it made sense to go there first. As soon as I arrived, I told them everything. My grandfather was furious. He practically stormed out of the room to call my parents and tore into them over the phone, demanding to know what they'd been thinking. My grandma stayed with me, comforting me as I finally let out everything I'd been holding in. All the frustration, betrayal, and hurt came flooding out, and for the first time, I felt safe enough to cry. Later that night, my grandpa told me they were calling my mum's parents too, and that they'd all be coming over the next day. He told me not to worry, that they'd help me through this, and I finally felt a sense of relief. I didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time in days, I felt like someone was truly in my corner. The next morning, I woke up at my grandparents' place feeling like the ground had finally stopped shaking beneath me. My grandparents, both sets actually, showed up soon after breakfast. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I trusted them. My dad's parents were furious about what had happened, and my mum's parents weren't much happier. They had known things weren't perfect with my parents and me, but hearing about what they'd done was something entirely different. I could see the disappointment written all over their faces. That morning was full of conversations and plans. Both sets of grandparents had come up with a way to help me get back on track with college and, honestly, with my life. They knew I couldn't do anything about Stanford now, but they promised to cover every cent of my college expenses, no matter where I ended up going. This was huge because my parents had made it clear for years that they wouldn't be covering college costs for either my brother or me. That was the only thing they'd ever been fair about. They loved Nick more, but at least we both knew we were on our own financially. My grandparents' offer meant I wouldn't need loans or a job to scrape by through college. I could focus on studying, making the most of wherever I ended up. It was like they'd lifted this huge weight off my shoulders, and it felt amazing. But there was more. That night, after I'd fallen asleep, all my grandparents sat down and talked about what my parents had done. By the time I woke up, they'd made an enormous decision. They were cutting my parents out of their wills and naming me as their sole heir. I couldn't believe it. I didn't even know what to say when they told me. I was still so hurt by everything, but seeing how much they wanted to make things right hit me hard. I tried to thank them, but my grandpa just waved it off, saying, "This is on us, Leo. We should have done more to make sure your parents were treating you fairly, Dot." Over the next few days, things settled into a routine. I stayed with my dad's parents, and my mom's parents visited often. My parents hadn't tried to reach out since I'd left, and honestly, I was fine with that. For once, I didn't have to look over my shoulder or worry about what they might think. I finally felt a sense of peace. My grandma even told me that once I was ready to start college, all 4 of my grandparents would come with me to help me settle in. It was like they were trying to make up for every time my parents hadn't been there. Then, a few days later, my phone rang, and to my surprise, it was my parents. At first, I thought maybe they'd finally realized how much they'd hurt me, and that maybe they were calling to apologize. But no, they'd only found out that both sets of my grandparents had decided to cut them out of their wills. Instead of apologizing or even acknowledging what they'd done, they blamed me. They accused me of snitching to my grandparents and told me I'd ruined their lives over something that wasn't a big deal. The anger that had simmered under the surface came roaring back. I told them that if they thought sabotaging my future to protect Nick's feelings was no big deal, they didn't deserve a place in my life, much less an inheritance. I let them know that my grandparents had made the right choice. I was happy that they'd cut them off. I told them maybe now they could spend all their time and money on their golden child, Nick, and that I'd be just fine without them. It's hard to describe how freeing it felt to finally say all the things I'd been holding back for so long. My mum started yelling, calling me every name in the book, while my dad tried to talk over her, demanding I talk to my grandparents and get them to reconsider. I just hung up. There was nothing more to say. Later, I told my grandparents about the call. My grandpa put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Next time, just hang up as soon as they start. You don't owe them a thing." It felt good to have that support, to know they understood that I didn't have to keep dealing with the hurt my parents kept throwing at me. When I told some of my friends about everything, they didn't react the way I expected. Some of them actually thought I'd gone too far by gloating about the inheritance situation with my parents. They said I should have just accepted it and moved on without rubbing it in. But the truth is, they don't understand. Most of my friends come from supportive homes where their parents cheer them on no matter what. They've never had to compete for love or attention or watch their own parents tear down their dreams. I realized that in the end, I didn't owe them any explanation. I had survived a lifetime of feeling like I didn't belong in my own family, like I was always just the other kid. If I wanted to gloat a little, I felt like I'd earned that right. So here I am, living with my grandparents, surrounded by people who genuinely care about me. My mum's parents went back home yesterday, but they promised they'd come back soon, and I know they will. It's weird to say, but I finally feel like I have a family I can rely on, even if it's not the one I grew up with. And that's something I wouldn't trade for anything. For the next few days, things felt strangely calm. I settled into my grandparents' home, which quickly started to feel like my real home. My grandparents kept me busy, helping me get everything ready for college, filling out forms, talking about the dorm arrangements, even buying a few things I'd need. My grandpa would joke that he'd never seen his house so full of college energy. And honestly, it felt good to be around people who seemed excited for me, who genuinely wanted to see me succeed. My grandparents on both sides had all taken my side completely. I know they were still angry with my parents and hurt by what they'd done, but they didn't let that show around me. They kept their focus on making sure I was okay. And then, just when things were starting to settle down, my parents decided to show up unannounced. It was 2 days ago. They came by without warning, no heads up, nothing. I saw them first through the window and my stomach dropped. Part of me wanted to just pretend we weren't home, but my grandpa opened the door before I could say anything. Right away, my mum was on the attack. She didn't come in. She didn't even greet my grandparents. She looked past them straight at me and started in calling me selfish and a backstabbing brat for snitching to my grandparents about what they did. She said I'd ruined everything for our family just because I wanted to be the favourite. I quote, "I'll admit, I was stunned. I hadn't planned on talking to them, and I definitely hadn't expected them to be so hostile, especially after all they'd done. I didn't respond right away. I didn't really know what to say. I think I was just processing how easily they'd turned their actions around and put the blame on me. My dad stepped in next, trying to sound more reasonable, saying I didn't understand what they'd done was for Nick's sake and for the good of the family. But by then, all the old anger I'd felt came rushing back. I told them, straight up, that they were the ones who'd ruined everything. They'd sabotaged my future for their own reasons and then had the nerve to blame me when they got called out. I wasn't about to apologize for snitching when they'd done something so low behind my back. I reminded them that they'd made their choices and now they were dealing with the consequences. They didn't want me to go to Stanford because it would hurt Nick. Fine. But that didn't mean they could expect me to take it lying down. It got heated fast. My mum started yelling back, saying I was overreacting and acting entitled, like I even would have gotten into Stanford in the first place. That stung, but I fired back, telling her maybe I would have had a chance if she hadn't decided to take it away. When she saw that I wasn't backing down, she only got angry, trying to guilt-trip me by saying I was being ungrateful and spoiled. That's when my grandma stepped in. She told my mum to leave, to get out if she couldn't speak to me with respect. My parents were both shocked. I don't think they'd ever been put in their place like that, especially by their own parents. But they didn't leave. They just stood there, yelling, refusing to let it go. I could see my grandpa's patience slipping as he reached his breaking point. Then he walked over to the corner, turned on the sprinklers, and gave my parents a good, thorough soaking. They scrambled to get away, soaked and humiliated, but they finally left. It might sound ridiculous, but watching them get sprayed like that felt like a small piece of justice for everything they'd done. After they left, my grandparents reassured me that I wouldn't have to deal with my parents anymore if I didn't want to. My grandpa even said that if they tried to pull anything else, he'd call the police without hesitation. For the first time since the whole mess started, I felt like I had some control over my life. My parents were out of the picture, and I could focus on my future without worrying about their interference. The next day, I told my grandparents how much it meant to me to have them in my corner. I'd never felt this kind of support from family before, and it made me realize that maybe family wasn't just the people you're born to, but the ones who genuinely care about your happiness. That might sound cheesy, but after everything, it's the truest thing I know. With my parents out of the way, I finally had space to breathe and think about what was next. I was starting college soon, and while Stanford was out, I still had several great options. I decided I'd make the most of wherever I ended up, and maybe, just maybe, one day I'd even find a way to be grateful that things had happened this way. It had been painful, but in a weird way, it had also freed me from feeling like I needed my parents' approval. At this point, I was feeling more and more ready to move on. My grandma joked that I'd become a tough cookie, and I think she's right. This experience hardened me in ways I never expected, but it also made me realize I could stand up for myself, even if it meant standing up to my own parents. The months that followed were a breath of fresh air. I'd cut ties with my parents, and thanks to my grandparents, I had everything I needed to start this new chapter without looking back. It was surreal to feel so supported. I'd gone from feeling constantly criticized to being surrounded by people who actually believed in me. My mum's parents had gone back to their place, but they called regularly and they'd promised they'd all be there to see me off when college started. Meanwhile, my dad's parents were busy making sure everything was lined up for my start date. They joked that they hadn't been this busy in years, and for the first time, I felt what it was like to be part of a family that was proud of me. My grandma would make these little comments, things like, "You're going to do amazing things, Leo." And every time, it felt like I was hearing something completely new, like she was saying words I'd never known could be directed at me. Life felt good, and I was finally moving forward. But then, just when I thought my parents were out of the picture for good, they showed up again. This time, they didn't come to my grandparents' house. Instead, they sent a long, accusatory email. They were furious again about being cut out of the inheritance and demanded that I fix things by talking to my grandparents. They went on and on about how I was ungrateful and selfish, how I'd betrayed the family over something that, according to them, was for the greater good. Reading their email only solidified my resolve. They still didn't understand how badly they'd hurt me. They still refused to accept any responsibility for what they'd done. It was like they'd convinced themselves that everything they'd done to me was justified, that it was all for the sake of protecting Nick. I could feel the old anger bubbling up, but instead of replying, I just blocked them. I wasn't going to waste any more energy on people who couldn't see past their own selfishness. When I told my grandparents about the email, they just nodded and said, "Good riddance." My grandpa reminded me that, with or without my parents' acceptance, I had the support of people who actually cared. He made it clear they'd stand by me no matter what, and that was all I needed to hear. Soon after, college finally started. My grandparents drove with me to help me move in, and having them there made it all feel real. My grandma cried as we said goodbye, but my grandpa just pulled me into a hug and said, "You've got this, kid." Watching them drive away was bittersweet, but as I turned around to head to my dorm, I felt ready. I was here on my own, standing on my own 2 feet, and it felt incredible. College life turned out to be everything I'd hoped for and more. I made friends, joined clubs, and got lost in all the new experiences. For the first time, I could just be myself without the pressure of constantly being compared to Nick. It felt like I was living the life I'd been waiting for, free from all the drama and competition that used to weigh me down. My classes were challenging, sure, but I was finally learning things that excited me. Every day I woke up with a sense of purpose, a sense that I was building a future that was entirely my own. Over time, I stopped thinking about my parents as much. They'd tried to reach out once or twice through family members, but my grandparents had always shut it down before anything could reach me. My extended family had mostly taken my side too, and many had started distancing themselves from my parents. I guess the whole mess had shown everyone a side of them they hadn't expected. And here I am now, a few months into college and feeling like a completely different person. I'm not at Stanford, but honestly, it doesn't matter. I know now that I don't need a specific name on a diploma to succeed. I just need my own drive and the support of the people who truly care about me. I've finally let go of the bitterness I had toward my parents, though I doubt I'll ever forgive them. But I don't need their approval or their apologies to keep moving forward. If this whole experience has taught me anything, it's that family isn't about blood or obligation. It's about loyalty, love, and respect. My grandparents showed me that, and I'm beyond grateful. I may have lost one family, but I gained a new one that's worth so much more. The best part? My grandparents are still my biggest fans. They call me every week, eager to hear about my classes, my friends, and everything I'm learning. I know I wouldn't be here without them, and one day I hope I can make them proud. My parents might not have believed in me, but I don't need them to. I've got all the family I need, and I'm finally free to live the life I choose. Story 2. I paid for the family trip, but my sister wouldn't let me go. Her ticket was cancelled by me. I decided it was time to do something significant for my family after what seemed like an endless year of work-related stress. We haven't taken a true family vacation in years, and I'm the eldest of 3 at 29. We just didn't take many vacations when we were kids. Due to financial constraints and everyone's hectic schedules, we were unable to make it happen. But this year, I decided to give everyone a vacation because I had finally saved up enough money. It was an easy strategy. I reserved a villa on the beach for us. I covered the property, flights, some delicious meals, and even some enjoyable activities. My family received it as a present, a means of getting back in touch and truly enjoying one another's company without the typical pressures. Jake, my 26-year-old younger brother, was thrilled right away. He is laid back, doesn't expect for much, and is quite appreciative if anything similar occurs. My folks were also overjoyed. They began discussing how long it had been since we all got together to do something. And Lily comes next. Our relationship has always been a little difficult, and she is 24. I suppose there are benefits to being the youngest, as if I were more pampered than Jake or I ever were. She essentially got everything she wanted as a child. She is also accustomed to everything being about her, even now. However, I wanted to be the larger person on this vacation. I persuaded myself to go along with it since this was meant to be a family day, and I wanted everyone to enjoy themselves. She first appeared excited. My parents started discussing what to bring as soon as I shared the itinerary to the family group chat. Lily was raving about how excited she was for the beach, while Jake was giggling about us all packing into a villa. However, she immediately began making these little recommendations. They were sufficiently naive at first. "Hello? Are there any nice places to shop close to the villa? I'd really like to go snorkeling. Can we fit it in your opinion?" Typical thing. Nothing strange. Then, however, she casually interrupted. "If Tasha could accompany us, that would be a lot of fun. Her pal Tasha isn't just any friend, though." Tasha is the same individual that secretly dated my ex-fiancé. Yes, that in and of itself is a whole horrible narrative. However, it's sufficient to state that I'm not very interested in going on a trip with her. Lily is aware of this. She is aware of the past and the pain it caused. And here she was, feigning indifference. I disregarded it in the hopes that she would take the signal that it was only a casual remark. However, she brings it up again the next day. This time, she's discussing how Tasha would adore this location in the family group chat. Additionally, I am eager to show Tasha the villa. She simply pretended that I had previously consented to bring her, really. To correct the record, I gave her a call. I made an effort to remain composed and give a clear explanation. This is a family vacation, Lily. I organised this for us, and Tasha's presence bothers me. She instantly responded with this theatrical sigh without even pausing. What's causing your stiffness? Tasha has been going through a difficult period, and it's just another individual. She is truly deserving of some time off. I was losing my mind. This has nothing to do with whether Tasha needs a vacation, Lily. It has to do with the fact that I organised this family vacation. Tasha isn't related. You are also aware of our past. It bothers me that she's coming. Lily sighed in frustration and exaggeration, as if I were the most irrational person in the world. You quote, really self-centered. Just because you paid for this trip doesn't mean you're acting like it's all about you. What I was hearing was unbelievable. She didn't understand at all. I'm not being self-centered, Lily. I'm establishing limits. Go ahead and take Tasha on a trip if you want to, but that journey isn't this one. This is meant to be for our family. For a moment, she remained silent, and I reasoned that perhaps, just possibly, she understood. She then let forth a strange, almost sardonic chuckle. All right. In any case, I simply assumed that you would be old enough to overlook this. However, I suppose not. She hung up on me after that. As I tried to comprehend what had just transpired, I sat there in shock. I was arranging this entire trip and taking care of everything for my family. And she had the audacity to complain as though I was being difficult because I wouldn't allow her to bring Tasha. Even though the entitlement was ridiculous, I made an effort to ignore it, reasoning that perhaps she would now stop. Despite her stubbornness, she would undoubtedly understand the hint. False. She resumed participating in the family group chat the next day. Everyone deserves to have fun, and some people just want to control everything, she said in a passive-aggressive manner. She also said how excited she was to take Tasha shopping close to the resort. She seemed to be pushing me to see how far she could push me. I almost called her out in front of everyone, but I chose not to give in to the pressure. Rather, I sent her another brief and straight text message. Tasha isn't coming, Lily. The narrative is over. Stop bringing it up, please. I assumed she was finally taking it seriously because she didn't respond soon away. However, she wrote me a lengthy letter an hour later, claiming that I was being unjust and that I never paid attention to her or cared about her viewpoint. She was making a big deal out of it and making me seem terrible for not allowing her to bring her buddy along on the scheduled family vacation. Trying to be patient, I texted back. It's not about your viewpoint, Lily. This vacation was organised for our family, and I don't feel comfortable having Tasha join us. There is no dispute about this. I assumed she had finally given up when she left me on read. Naturally, though, she returns to the family group chat the very following day, bringing up Tasha once more. Posting things like, I can't wait for Tasha to join us, and she's going to love the beach. She didn't even pretend to ask anymore, as if she was making up her mind that Tasha was coming. I understood then that she would simply keep pressing. She was not going to let it go. Despite my repeated refusals to her. She was attempting to paint me as the one who was being unreasonable, as if I were being petty and domineering. But I had had enough by then. I refused to allow her to spoil the trip. Perhaps she didn't need to come at all if she couldn't respect my boundaries. This was meant to be a present, an opportunity to show my family some love. And in order to obtain what she wanted, she was making it into some kind of twisted game. Even though I was worn out, I made the decision that I would not give up. I believed I had clarified myself by now. I kept telling Lily that Tasha was not allowed to go on this vacation. I assumed she would finally realize what was going on and stop pressing, However, she returned with another message that caught me off guard, just when I thought the turmoil might have subsided. I received the SMS from her early in the morning. "Look," she wrote, "perhaps you should not come if you don't let Tasha come. Your attitude is destroying this vacation, which is meant to be enjoyable for all of us." I hardly believed what I was reading as I sat there looking at my phone. She was behaving as though I was the stranger on this vacation, which was my present to the family. She made the decision to continue pressuring Tasha to go on a vacation that she wasn't even supposed to be on. However, I was the issue somehow. I took a while to reply. To be honest, I was too angry to even make a response without it devolving into a full-on tirade. However, she persisted in messaging me throughout the day with remarks about how everyone else would enjoy themselves more if I would just give in and allow Tasha to go. It seemed so unjust, like I was being coerced into allowing her to bring someone I really didn't want on this vacation. She called me at lunchtime, and I chose to answer. I was ready to try one last time to explain things to her. She began with the same pattern. "How come you're being so tough? It's only one more individual. It quote as not really that significant." I inhaled deeply while attempting to maintain a steady voice. "It is really important to me, Lily. This journey isn't about Tasha, it's for our family. You are aware of our past, and forcing this on me is really unjust of you." She didn't pause at all. "Perhaps it's time for you to move on. You're the one who stated that the purpose of this vacation was to re-establish family ties after all. I also think of the Tasha family. For me, that was the final straw. I'm not going to pay for Tasha to accompany me on this trip, Lily. It isn't taking place. And perhaps you shouldn't come either if you can't respect that. That should be it," I thought. However, she returned with something unexpected. "All right, I'll then inform my parents that I'm being kicked from the family vacation. Let's see their reaction to that." To be honest, I was more irritated than I had been in a long time when I hung up. It was more than just the journey. She was making everything about herself, and that was the problem. She would even go so far as to engage our parents. As if this were some sort of conspiracy against her, rather than me only wishing to establish a limit. My mother did indeed call within 1 hour. She began when I picked up. "What's up with you and Lily, honey? She claims that you are not including her in the vacation and that you are being tough about it. It was so unbelievable to me. You know that wasn't the case, Mum. This vacation was organised for all of us by myself. However, Lily is adamant on bringing Tasha. She won't let it go even after I repeatedly told her no." A sound captured in the centre of Mum's side. "I get it, but shouldn't we all simply attempt to work things out? Perhaps if Tasha only visited for a few days. No, mother." Trying not to come across as harsh, I interrupted. "We are doing this journey together as a family. I'm footing the bill. Tasha shouldn't be there too. Compromise is not the point here. It has to do with Lily not honouring my choice." After a lengthy silence, Mum eventually answered, "Okay, but could you at least attempt to have another conversation about it? If you're more composed about it, perhaps she will understand." I concurred. I knew it was useless, but mostly it was to maintain the peace. I had previously attempted to explain things, but it seemed like she would always turn them around to paint me in a negative light. But I made the decision to give it one final go so as not to upset my mother. I sent Lily a message to ask if we could get together and discuss this face to face. I figured she may be a little more sensible if we met in person. Later that afternoon, we met at a coffee shop and I arrived ready to explain everything. She arrived with a face that conveyed her sense of victory, as if she was waiting for me to give up after she had persuaded everyone else. Began as soon as we were seated. "I hope everyone has a good time on this vacation. But it seems like you're not listening, Lily. It's final. I don't want Tasha on this vacation. This is a family event that I organise with the goal of us all spending time together." She rolled her eyes and crossed her arms. "And you believe that excluding her is reasonable. To me, she is like family, and I believed that the goal of this was to re-establish contact. It seemed unbelievable to me. You're giving the impression that I'm suddenly excluding her. The reason for this is that, following everything that transpired, I don't feel at ease around her. I'm requesting a week without her." She simply continued, though. Well, I won't abandon my best friend, so you're throwing me off the trip. That quote's not what I'm saying, Lily, I answered in frustration. Tasha may accompany you on any vacation, but not this one. I'm giving the family this trip as a gift. I will not cover the cost of someone who is not involved. Acting as though she was finished with me, she sneered and turned her head away. You can't expect me to be involved if you can't include Tasha. I simply gazed at her, attempting to comprehend her words. Just because you can't let go of taking Tasha, are you truly ready to skip this trip? She gave a shrug. Maybe I am. I don't need this stress. And honestly, maybe we'd all have a better time without you and your dominating attitude. It hit me then. She truly felt she had me trapped. Like I'd have no choice but to back down. But in that moment, I realized it wasn't going to happen. I'd made up my mind and I wasn't about to let her push me around, no matter how much guilt she attempted to throw my way. All right then, Lily, I replied, rising up. If that's how you feel, then maybe you shouldn't come. I quote V finished this, back and forth. She was somewhat taken aback, as if she hadn't anticipated that I would truly defend myself. However, she only scoffed once again, mumbling something about how I was being foolish and self-centered, rather than acknowledging that she had gone too far. Then she bounded out. For some minutes I sat there and let it to sink in. The main goal of my trip was to enjoy myself, unwind, and re-establish a connection with my family. I found myself drawn into this issue because my sister was unable to accept a straightforward limit. However, I realized immediately that I had made the proper decision. Perhaps Lily didn't need to be there at all if she couldn't respect my choice. I believed that things had finally calmed down a few days after that contentious discussion with Lily. She had shown her displeasure with my choice about Tasha, but I assumed she would change her mind in time. I mean, I was paying for this family vacation. She would see that the drama wasn't worth it, wouldn't she? Well, I was mistaken. Absolutely incorrect. My sister appeared to have calmed down after some time. She even made contact and expressed her desire to assist, ensure that everyone had a wonderful trip. She then casually asked for the details of the booking account, stating that she only wanted to go over the activities and perhaps recommend a few new ones. All right, I thought. Perhaps she is now making an effort to get along and is looking forward to the vacation. I then provided her the information. Naturally, things started to change at that point. I received an email notification from the booking business one afternoon. At first, I assumed it was simply another reminder about the upcoming vacation, but my heart nearly stopped as I opened it. We've changed your reservation, it said. Bewildered? To observe what was happening, I clicked in. The message was there, as stark as anything. The ticket you purchased has been cancelled. I tried to make sense of it by blinking a few times. Why would they cancel my ticket? It was completely nonsensical. Everything had been arranged by me. The first thing I noticed when I went into the account was that my name was missing from the reservation, which made my pulse race. Tasha had taken its place instead. To make matters worse, my card was charged. I was enraged. No, extremely angry. I was furious. Knowing what had transpired didn't need a genius. After gaining access to the account, Lily cancelled my ticket and replaced it with Tasha's. Moreover, she had used my credit card to complete the transaction, as if she had been anticipating it all. I would simply comply. I was astounded by her courage. It was such an obvious, calculated action, as if she didn't give a damn about my feelings. Almost trembling, I reached for my phone and dialed her number, waiting for her to answer. She sounded far too casual for someone who had just gone behind my back when she answered on the second ring. Hello? What is going on? As if nothing were wrong, she said. Lily, I murmured, straining to maintain a steady tone. Why did I just receive an email stating that Tasha's ticket was added to the reservation and my ticket was cancelled? There was a moment's silence. Then she did laugh. She chuckled. Yes, exactly. I reasoned that this would be simpler if you intend to be so obstinate about Tasha's arrival. Perhaps you should simply skip this one. Not as much drama, correct? What I was hearing was unbelievable. This was meant to be a family vacation, Lily. My present to the family. You can't just decide to invite Tasha and kick me out. This isn't how it operates. She sighed dramatically, as if I were the source of her problems. Look, you're the one who's exaggerating the situation. My dearest buddy Tasha is deserving of some time off. To be honest, your petty behavior is destroying everything for everyone. Petty? In fact, she believed that I was being petty in this situation. I'm done with this, Lily. You are not going on this vacation, and I am cancelling your and Tasha's tickets. Not to be deterred, she scoffed. You wouldn't actually do it, would you? Come on, I quote, V already assured your parents that you'll change your mind. It was an absurd entitlement. She pretended to have already won, as if I would never really go through with cancelling her seat. But without saying another word, I had finished her games. I ended the call, cancelled her and Tasha's tickets after logging back into the account. To make sure she wouldn't pull anything else, I changed the password. My phone began ringing with her calls and texts in a matter of minutes. Are you serious? Why are you acting this way? The entire vacation will be ruined by you. She persisted in accusing me of being selfish and overreacting in an attempt to guilt-trip me. But I was too far gone to care at that time. She had gone out of her way to make this vacation all about her, and I had attempted to make it special for everyone. It was enough. I was absolutely worn out by the turmoil. Even though I had been so enthusiastic for this vacation, even though it was awful, I knew I had made the correct choice. I would not allow her to push me about in any manner, not after all I had done to help them. Jake messaged me later that evening to let me know he had heard about the incident. He informed me that he still looked forward to the trip and that he understood why I did it. I was relieved to hear that message. I knew I had one person on my side at least. However, Lily continued to email me, composing lengthy messages about how unjust I was, how I had wrecked everything, and how she was merely attempting to make the vacation enjoyable for everyone. She tried everything, including making up excuses and guilt-tripping, but I wasn't buying it. I ended up not answering and shutting off my phone. If she couldn't respect my choice, I wasn't going to give her any more of my energy since I'd had enough of her trying to control the issue. After that, she was no longer required to be present. I spent the next day preparing everything for the trip and making sure there would be no last-minute shocks by double-checking the bookings. I could genuinely look forward to the holiday without all the turmoil looming over me. Or it seemed like a weight was finally being lifted. I thought everything would be okay the day after I cancelled Lily and Tasha's tickets. But I couldn't have been more mistaken. The actual consequences appeared to be just getting started. My parents were phoning constantly, and the family chat was overflowing with messages. Lily had obviously spent no time in stating her position, and based on everyone's reactions, I suspected it was a highly selective account of what happened. At first, I chose to ignore the calls in an effort to do some work and wait for things to settle down. But eventually, I realized I would have to deal with it. When my mother phoned for the 4th time that morning, I answered. I tried to seem casual when I responded, "Hey, Mom," but I could clearly sense the stress in her voice. "What's going on, honey?" "Lily is crying as she tells you that she has been expelled from the family vacation. She is inconsolable." Although she seemed sincere in her concern, I could tell she was already tilting toward Lily. I inhaled deeply. "Lily didn't tell you everything, Mum. I didn't just abruptly remove her from the vacation. She used my card to pay for it," added Tasha, cancelled my ticket and went into the booking account. Putting my foot down was my only option. After a lengthy silence, I could practically see her turning to face my dad and attempting to understand what I had said. "At last," she answered. "Lily sounds nothing like that." "Are you certain that there wasn't a miscommunication of any kind?" I said, attempting to sound steady. "Mom, I can verify it with the emails. When she didn't get her way, she just cancelled my ticket. When I approached her, she advised me to simply remain behind if I didn't want to accompany Tasha. More quiet." My dad then answered the phone. "Honey, all we're trying to do is comprehend. It was intended to be a family vacation. Is it not possible for us to come up with a solution without leaving anyone behind?" I felt like screaming, as if I hadn't been battling her for the past few weeks, pushing, guilt-tripping, and trying to coerce me into giving in debt. They were so quick to jump to her defense. I attempted to figure it out. She wouldn't listen when I repeatedly told her that this was a family trip and that I didn't want Tasha to go. Then, behind my back, she went one step further and made adjustments. She cannot simply walk all over me in that manner. I could tell he was conflicted because he sighed, "Look, I understand your frustration, but this is incredibly difficult for everyone. Wouldn't you be able to overlook her and forgive her?" The part that hurt the most was that they were unable to recognize that I wasn't the one who had gone too far. So, let me clarify this. I arrange everything, pay for the family's trip, and establish boundaries. I quote M, the one who must simply forgive and go on since she is incapable of handling it. They fell silent, and from my vantage point, I could tell they were beginning to realize they hadn't given it any thought. My mother finally spoke, but she seemed uncertain. "Okay, we don't want to minimize your feelings of hurt, we get that. However, Lily is. Family and your sister should come first. Exactly, I said. Family should come first, which is why I wanted this to be a family trip. Just us. But Lily has been handling this whole thing like it's her trip. Her chance to bring Tasha without considering how I feel about it." They didn't argue with me after that, so it appeared like that really got to them. They were obviously uneasy with the thought of Lily missing out, even though they knew she could be challenging and had witnessed her pull antics like this before. And they continued to look for a compromise. My dad recommended that we hold a family meeting. Perhaps if we all get together, Lily will apologize and we can proceed. It nearly made me chuckle. Lily already believed she was correct, so there was no way she was going to apologize. However, I was aware that my parents would only persist if I didn't make an effort. So I grudgingly consented. "Okay," I said, "but I'm telling you now that I won't back down if she attempts to change the situation." We all convened at my parents' place that evening. As soon as I entered the room, I could feel the tension. Sitting together on one side of the table, my parents appeared to have just finished a demanding day. Jake was also present. He was obviously already tired with the whole thing and was leaning back in his chair with his arms folded. Then there was Lily, sitting there trying to put on her best show while holding a tissue. "The victim face is me," she began as soon as I took a seat. She looked at me with a pained face and said, "I can't believe you do this to me. I assumed you valued family more than this." Despite my need to roll my eyes, I maintained my composure. "Without asking, Lily, you got into my reservation, cancelled my ticket, and added Tasha. What were you anticipating?" She laughed. "All I wanted was for everyone to have a good time on the vacation. By excluding someone I consider family, you are the one acting selfishly in this situation." Jake, who had remained quiet until now, suddenly opened his mouth. "Really, Lily, this vacation is a gift from her to us. You can't act as though you have the last say on everything." She gave him a glance. "Oh, you're also on her side now?" Jake gave a shrug. "Common sense is what I support. It's no if she says no. Respect operates in this way. At that moment, my parents intervened in an attempt to diffuse the tension. My mother said softly but firmly as she glanced at Lily, "You can't alter someone's plans in that way and expect them to accept it, honey. It has nothing to do with Tasha. Boundaries must be respected." Evidently aware that she wasn't receiving the response she had hoped for, Lily glanced around the table. However, she doubled down rather than backed down. All right, in any case, the fact that she can't even move on from something that happened so long ago simply seems pitiful to me. Even though Tasha made a mistake, I still want her to remain my best friend. For me, it was it. That's precisely the issue, Lily. You're not paying attention. It was meant to be for us. Additionally, I've made it obvious from the start that I don't want Tasha there, but you continue to disregard that, making it seem like I'm the villain because I didn't want to invite someone who had cheated on me. It was obvious that she had no intention of apologizing or accepting responsibility. She just crossed her arms and turned away. I went to my parents. "I'm not going to change my opinion, you see. I quote Mem, not re-adding the ticket that I cancelled. She trampled over whatever boundaries I attempted to establish. Perhaps she shouldn't come if she can't understand that this is meant to be a family vacation." My dad didn't protest, but he did appear dissatisfied. I could see that he was beginning to realize that respect was more important than the vacation. Lily, who continued to avoid eye contact with me, was viewed from my mother's side. She murmured softly. Lily, we all want to go this vacation together as a family, but you must realize that you cannot decide for everyone. Perhaps you should pass on this one if you are unable to honor your sister's desires. I could tell Lily was angry because her cheeks flushed. But without saying another word, she got up, gathered her belongings, and hurried out. When she was gone, there was a thick quiet. My parents seemed devastated. Jake appeared relieved, and I simply felt worn out. At least I felt like I had finally been heard, even though this wasn't as I had hoped. My dad glanced at me after a few minutes and said, "We'll figure this out. I understand that standing your position is difficult, but you did the right thing." And for the first time since the beginning of this whole catastrophe, I thought perhaps I had. I felt as though I could finally breathe again on the day of the vacation. To be honest, I wasn't even sure whether I would still be looking forward to this vacation after all the tension, disagreements, and drama with Lily. But as Jake, I, and our parents made our way to the airport, I found that yes, I was looking forward to it, without the conflict and the ongoing disputes. When we eventually made it to Hawaii, it seemed as though the cloud that had been hanging over the journey had lifted. It seemed as though a burden had been removed. Lily wasn't there. No additional drama, no sly surprises. In fact, I was able to relax and savor the outcome of my laborious preparation. The beaches were picture perfect, the air was pleasant, and our accommodations exceeded my expectations. Now, without the ongoing turmoil, I had meticulously planned this vacation. I could unwind and truly take pleasure in it. From the beginning, I was in charge of the planning. We all went out to a local restaurant that I had reserved in advance, replete with a private luau on the first night. I didn't tell my parents I had planned it. Their faces lighted up like children watching fireworks when the dancers emerged and the fire display began. Dad appeared at ease, simply taking it all in, while Mum was very thrilled. My brother Jake leaned over and nodded to me, saying, "Well done." It was all worthwhile when I saw how much fun everyone was having. We explored all Hawaii has to offer over the course of the following several days. Snorkeling, a boat trip around the islands, and even a helicopter flight were among the many activities I had planned, so Jake and I could see the entire island from above, without Lily interfering or griping about anything. I sensed the change. All of us could just enjoy one another's company. But the trip hadn't completely destroyed Lily. She would sometimes send me a message. Curiosity overcame me, even though I knew the wisest course of action would be to ignore her. Well, her texts were just what I was expecting. Claiming that I ruined her trip. Complaining that I had taken this trip away from her and that it was unjust. Everything. Even my parents were aware that she was acting in an uncontrollable manner. By this time, they were witnessing it personally, so it was a comfort when they began to inquire less about why I had excluded her. My mother once remarked, "I just wish Lily could have enjoyed this with us," as she glanced at her phone throughout our supper. However, perhaps her absence was for the best. To be honest, it was quite shocking to hear that from my mother, who always stood up for Lily. At that moment, I realized they were beginning to see why I had been firm. Although they were sad that she wasn't present, they also realized how difficult it had been to put up with her incessant demands and sense of entitlement. The journey passed in a haze of incredible encounters. Hawaii has the ability to soothe people and make them value the small things in life. My family was beaming and full of wonderful memories by the time we were leaving for home. The trip had been all I had hoped for, despite the lingering shadow of Lily's absence. However, Lily wasn't happy with our absence. As soon as we returned, I saw that she had gone on a tirade about how our parents had picked me over her and had banned me on social media. She claimed that the family only cared about me because I could afford things like the vacation, and she even called Jake a profiteer for helping me. Even though it was a strange turn of events, I stopped allowing her to manipulate or shame me at that time. Even if she didn't see it, I knew I had done what was best for everyone. My parents told me that they had a major argument with Lily a few weeks after we got back. Instead of accepting responsibility for her conduct, she blamed them for siding with me and excluding her. When my dad finally had enough, he told her that she was excluded because of her conduct and that she would keep pushing the family away if she didn't change. When I went to my parents' house a few months later, I saw something odd. Lily had no one in her room. They acknowledged that they had asked her to leave when I questioned them about it. It seems like she had been taking advantage of them for too long. They simply asked for a tiny rent in an attempt to assist her, but she refused to pay and even accused them of being avaricious for expecting her to help. At last, my dad had had enough and informed her that she needed to get a home of her own. Lily first pretended to be upset, pleading and claiming she was unaware that they wanted her to move out. However, my parents remained steadfast. To give her a head start, my dad even went so far as to help her find a tiny apartment and cover 2 months' worth of rent. Admittedly, I felt it was more than she deserved, but I said nothing. She was no longer dependent on them, at least. I assumed that this was their method of supporting her without giving in to her entitlement. But in the weeks that followed, my mum would give me details on Lily's frequent, handy, unexpected visits around dinner time. She even started sleeping there sometimes, saying she was homesick. After putting up with it for a while, my parents realized that despite her employment, she was not paying the rent on her new apartment. Lily acknowledged spending the money on clothing and other items when my mother questioned her about it. Months have passed since she last paid her rent. My dad eventually had to take over once more. He advised her to handle her own funds as she could not continue to rely on them as a fallback option. The never-ending excuses were over, and he didn't back down this time. He was obviously emotionally and physically exhausted from putting up with her shenanigans. Calling Jake to ask if he would lend her money was Lily's final resort. She became even more desperate and begged him to borrow money from me on her behalf when he refused. Jake told her no and refused to be involved in her mess since he had had enough of her actions. Angry, Lily accused him of being my bootlicker and said that he had chosen me over her because I pay for things. He, always been on my side, she even said in a tirade. I became aware of the depth of her resentment after hearing that. However, I was happy that I wasn't the only one who recognized her conduct, rather than feeling guilty or upset. She obviously spent a lot of time trying to control us all, and this time it wasn't working. Lily arrived at my door a few months later, looking desperate and unkempt. She appeared to have been standing outside for some time on this chilly, wet day. She started telling about how difficult things had been for her right away after I allowed her in, even though I knew I would regret it. She asked me to speak with our parents and persuade them to allow her to return to the house. As I listened to her grievances, I remained still. I advised her to prove her ability to be responsible if she wanted our parents' support. She sneered, claiming that I was the cause of our family's division and labeling me a bad sibling. Her remarks, however, didn't hurt for once. I blocked her number once she departed. I knew she would keep pressing if I didn't, even though I hadn't needed to previously. To be honest, I'm okay with the fact that I don't know what she's up to these days. I learned during my vacation to Hawaii that, in order to safeguard your happiness, you may need to establish boundaries, even with family. Perhaps we can get back in touch if Lily ever makes the decision to change, but in the meantime, I'm clinging to the item I searched so hard for. Story 3. After my adoptive kid chose his biological father, I expelled him. He's pleading with me to return now, just due to his desire for this. Okay, so I'm 39 years old and married. About 16 years ago, my wife Linda was 39 years old. Since then, it seems like a lifetime has passed. In any case, she had a young kid named Mason who was only 2 years old when we were married. His biological father was no longer involved, like he had no idea who he was, in her opinion. But that didn't matter to me. Mason was my son as soon as we met, in my opinion. I fully committed to the role of father, and I formally adopted him once we were married. I treated him like my own flesh and blood after that. He rose to prominence in my life. To be honest, I have no idea how to describe it. However, you're not only taking on the positive aspects of fatherhood when you take on the role of father, particularly when adopting, are you? You're making a commitment to everything. Everything from the bad days to the tantrums, the restless nights, and the school runs. I witnessed everything. I wasn't merely a man who married his mother. His father was me. I also made sure he was aware of that. Even though I wasn't his biological father, I constantly informed him that I still loved him. For a long period, at least, our relationship was wonderful, and everything appeared to be stable. Around Mason's 15th birthday, things began to shift. At first, it was subtle. He simply gave off the impression of being far away. Surely you are aware of the nature of teenagers. It was one of those melancholy times, I thought. Adolescents become chilly. When you try to talk to them, they push you away and act like you're the most obnoxious person ever. So first, I didn't give it much thought. It wasn't really dramatic. He simply didn't want to spend as much time together, arguing over the silliest stuff while spending the entire day in his room. But the chill intensified. It stung, to be honest. I began to feel as though I had never known this child in my entire life. Perhaps I had done something, I reasoned. Perhaps I was being overly severe. I recall making several attempts to speak with him, asking him what was going on. I had the usual adolescent retort, "But you appear terrible these days." "Nothing. I'm all right." I retreated, supposing he would want some room, but things worsened. I once attempted to organize a family outing. Only him and me. You know, like the old days. When he was younger, we would go fishing together, and I thought it may help us reconnect. "Hey, want to go fishing this weekend?" I asked him. He just answered, "No, I have plans," after giving me a quick glance. I recognized then that there was a big problem. He simply shrugged his shoulders and said it didn't matter when I inquired what his plans were. That quote is not how he used to speak to me. My instinct told me something was wrong, but I didn't press him too much. Then, one day, I discovered the truth, and did it hit me hard. It turned out that Mason had been informed by my wife, Linda, who his biological father was. She would also allow him to meet the man behind my back. All of this took place. I didn't even know this existed. The rug seemed to have been torn out from under me. It seemed unbelievable to me. What might have been worse? The fact that Mason had been seeing this person and keeping it a secret from me, or the fact that Linda told him without even discussing it with me. I was utterly deceived. I understand. He is entitled to know the identity of his biological father. However, their approach seemed like a stab to the back. Of course, I confronted Linda about it. I refused to sit there and act as though nothing was wrong. I questioned her about why she had gone behind my back in that manner. What did she say? She reasoned that if Mason knew, it would be simpler. I was enraged. Who finds it easier? It was definitely not simpler for me, so I recall asking her. Things between Linda and I were never the same after that. There was no longer any trust. For Mason's sake, I made an effort to remain composed. However, how do you perceive your spouse? How about after she pulls a move like that? Mason and I were just taken by surprise by the lady I had been dating for years. He began to see his biological father more and more. He wanted to spend less time with me the more time he spent with him. I felt as though I had vanished from the world. He would either arrive home from school late or not at all. He would hardly speak to me at times, and it was brief when he did, as if he had no time for me. I even proposed that the three of us go to therapy in the hopes that we might resolve this situation. Mason, however, shot it down right away. He responded, "I don't need therapy. I'm all right." However, neither he nor I were feeling well. It seemed like I was reminded every day that the family I believed I had was vanishing individually. More indications that Mason was retreating were apparent to me. Occasionally he would make brief remarks about his bio dad, such as, "Oh, Dad says this," or I was taken there by my father. It was always painful. He no longer referred to me as Dad, only Mike. As if I were a guy who just so happened to share a house with him. He seemed to have already come to the conclusion that I was no longer his father. In a sense, I suppose I wasn't, not in his view. I felt like I was the only one making any effort to keep the relationship going, even though I was genuinely trying. He seemed to be pushing me more away each time I reached out, and to be honest, I was beginning to lose faith. When you're the only one fighting for anything, it's difficult to keep trying. At that point, I began to realize that perhaps, just possibly, the harm had already been done. I knew deep down that we couldn't just solve this, even if I didn't want to accept it. I felt as though this child was wasting all of the time, effort, and love I had invested in him. I wasn't prepared to quit up. but I wasn't sure how much more I could handle. Not quite yet. Things between Mason and I rapidly deteriorated once I discovered that Linda had spoken to Mason about his biological father without telling me. After that, I couldn't look at her the same way. The trust simply vanished. We seemed to be treading carefully on every talk, and to be honest, I had no idea how to make things better. I was upset, offended, and perplexed as to why she felt it was okay to hide anything like that from me. I made an effort to speak with her, wondering why she continued to meet with the bio dad behind my back and why she hadn't told me about him sooner. However, each response she provided just made matters worse. All I could think was, how could you do this and think it wouldn't blow up in our faces? While she continued to say things like, I thought it was the right time, and I didn't want to upset you. It is impossible to recover from such a betrayal. It was not long until we were always fighting. Mason was no longer the main focus. It was all of it. Little things that in the past wouldn't have disturbed me seemed like big bargains, and we were both aware that this would not work. She didn't seem interested in attempting to restore the broken trust, and I didn't want to live in a home full of falsehoods. I felt in my heart that the marriage was ended, even though we made an effort to continue for a few more months. I eventually went through with a divorce. Although it felt like the only option at the time, it was one of the most difficult decisions I have ever had to make. Every day just made things worse since we were living like strangers. The entire procedure took longer than I anticipated, and the documentation was disorganized. We had disagreements over everything. Who received what? Who was in charge of what bills? But Mason, the greatest battle was finished. He shouldn't have been forced to pick between us, in my opinion. It became evident, however, that Linda was not battling to keep him. She didn't seem as interested in trying to patch things up between the three of us as she was in her connection with Mason's biological father. The day we got down to discuss custody, Linda just shrugged and stated, "He should stay with you." As I recall, he "s accustomed to living here already." I felt relieved at the moment. All right, perhaps this is my opportunity to mend what remains of my friendship with Mason. Mason remained in the house with me after Linda moved out a few weeks later. It felt weird at first. I didn't press him and he didn't discuss the divorce much. I reasoned that with things changing so quickly, he was already suffering through enough. I made an effort to make things as normal as possible in the hopes that we might re-establish our connection before things took a turn for the worst if I gave him some space. So let's go back a few years to when things between Mason and I first started to become strange. I've just come to terms with his distance by now, and I made an effort to accept it, Perhaps this was simply how things will be going forward. Even though I didn't enjoy it, I decided to give him some space. Perhaps he would change his mind. Well, I was mistaken. Mason, however, was preparing to graduate from high school, an important time. Correct? I was pleased with him. Despite the fact that we hadn't been in contact recently, he had put in a lot of effort, and I was thrilled to join him in celebrating this accomplishment. My parents, siblings, cousins, and other family members. Everyone else was thrilled as well. We chose to have a lavish graduation celebration for him. It was a simple celebration with close relatives and friends, nothing special. I contacted him and informed him of our upcoming celebration. When I brought it up, he appeared a little indifferent, but because he didn't decline, I figured he would come. Why wouldn't he, after all? Everyone was excited to celebrate him at his graduation celebration. I didn't want any discomfort, so I made sure to include his mother, Linda, and even her relatives. For Mason's sake, we might maintain our civility. On the day of the celebration, everything is ready, including the food, music, decorations, and everything else. We're all waiting for Mason to arrive, and everyone is present. After an hour, then 2, and still no sign of him, I thought perhaps he was simply running late or anything. My stomach began to drop, but I made an effort to push it away. Perhaps he would arrive shortly due to an unforeseen circumstance. I'm attempting to maintain a brave front for my family. My niece is staring at me strangely as she browses through her phone. She shows me her phone as I approach her to inquire how she's doing. Images of Mason at a separate celebration, one hosted by his mother and her family, may be found on Instagram. Can you guess who appears in every photo? His biological father and mother are Mason. While my family waited for him to arrive, they were all there having a good time. To be honest, I was at a loss for words. I was caught completely off guard. My heart fell. I felt hurt, humiliated, and enraged. Everything at once. My niece glanced away awkwardly, perhaps feeling guilty about showing me the pictures, but I simply stood there for a minute, gazing at them. Mason was over there with his other family members, and everyone else at my party was just waiting for him to arrive, enjoying myself immensely. I couldn't hold myself together at that moment, and I didn't want to spoil the atmosphere for anybody else. I walked inside, informed my family that Mason would not be arriving, and simply tried not to show my distress. It was evident to my relatives. Naturally, they were aware that something was off, so I showed them the images. Despite everyone's disbelief, they made an effort to console me. "You're not to blame. He is young. For example, he is unaware of his actions." To be honest though, none of it was helpful. How could he have done this to me? Was all I could think. Ultimately, the celebration continued without him. However, it was different. Even though my family tried their hardest to lift my spirits, I couldn't help but feel betrayed the entire time. This wasn't a haphazard gathering. It was a celebration for his graduation. He could have at least informed me that he would not be attending. Rather, he celebrated with his biological father and Linda, leaving me and my whole family hanging. He seemed to no longer care about us. It really hit me later that evening as I was cleaning up the mess after everyone had departed. I had reared this child for nearly his whole life. When his biological father wasn't there, I was there for him. He didn't even have the grace to inform me he had other plans, even though I did everything I could for him. I felt as though I had been swapped out, as if my efforts on his behalf were in vain. His biological father had returned to the scene. That night, I didn't get much sleep. I simply kept replaying everything in my mind, attempting to pinpoint the point at which it all went wrong. Was I to blame for this? Did I treat him too harshly? Should I have done more to hold him near me? When did he begin to retreat? I was at a loss for what to think. I was still thinking about it the next day, attempting to choose if I should speak with him or simply ignore it. To be honest, though, I was too upset to overlook it. If I didn't, I determined I had to face him. I was going to be consumed by this. Mason eventually arrived home that morning, so I beckoned him into the kitchen. He appeared quite normal as he entered, as if nothing were amiss. I was much more irate after that. I asked him directly, "Why didn't you attend yesterday's graduation celebration?" "I have other plans," he added, shrugging as if it were no great issue. What I was hearing was unbelievable. Any other plans? You just failed to show up while your entire family was waiting for you. You were unable to SMS or even call. "I didn't think it was that big of a deal," he said, shrugging once again. I lost it at that point. I expressed to him my true feelings, my disappointment, my hurt, and how much it hurt to watch him pick his biological father and his mother's family above us. I explained to him that I had always supported him and that I didn't understand why he was treating me this way. I was furious and wasn't holding back, but I wasn't screaming or anything. Mason remained silent. He simply stood there as if you were unconcerned. He felt compelled to apologize, as if he said it only to get me to stop bothering him. He didn't appear apologetic. He just gave off the impression that he wanted the discussion to end. I was at a loss for words after that. I was devastated. To be honest, the child I had reared, the child I loved, was there in front of me, behaving as if I were unimportant. I left after telling him I needed time to ponder. I realized then that there had been a significant shift between us, and I doubted that things could ever return to their previous state. Mason and I were at odds even more after the whole graduation party fiasco. It feels like the final vestige of our connection. Just now, a thread had broken. He hardly ever talked to me unless he had to. Furthermore, I wasn't particularly making an effort to speak with him. We were only coexisting in the same home, being cautious and trying to stay away from one another. And each time I remembered how he skipped his graduation celebration to attend his bio father, it made me angry once more. For a time, I tried to be calm, hoping he would change his mind. Perhaps this time he would truly apologize. Or at least, attempt to explain what in the world was wrong with him. But no, nothing. While I was still sitting there thinking about it, he continued living his life as if nothing had happened. I was no longer able to ignore it. I was growing increasingly irritated every day. This was not a minor dispute. I couldn't continue to act as though it didn't hurt because it felt like a complete betrayal. I decided I had had enough when I woke up one morning. I couldn't continue in this manner. I'm carrying around this enormous knot in my gut. I'm waiting for him to care. I would have to extract the answers from him if he refused to provide them. So as soon as he went through the door, I waited till he got home from school. We need to discuss, I informed him. He gave me an irritated expression, as if I was simply disturbing him. Is it possible to wait? I have tasks to complete. He hardly raised his head from his phone to say that. No, I said, attempting to maintain my composure despite my already boiling state. We are currently conversing. With a theatrical sigh, he followed me into the kitchen, dragging his steps as if he were a victim in this whole situation. I motioned for him to join me at the table and sat down. He sank into the chair opposite from me and kept his eyes on his phone. I inhaled deeply. We need to discuss what's been happening, Mason. I need to know why you're ignoring me since you haven't been yourself in a long time, and I have a right to know what's happening. He shrugged, avoiding eye contact. What you want me to say is unclear to me. I was irritated by that reaction. Are you saying that you are unsure of what I want you to say? Why don't you tell anyone why you skipped your graduation celebration? What about when you're treating me like I don't exist? He eventually raised his head from his phone, but his expression was devoid of remorse or shame. It was annoyance, as if I were the issue here. Look, that didn't seem like a huge problem to me. I attended the celebration my mother threw for me. This is becoming something because of you. It isn't. Not a huge concern. Mason, you couldn't even text us to let us know you weren't coming, even though your entire family was waiting for you. And you didn't anticipate any pain from that. Did you not anticipate my harm? He gave an eye roll. Well, I don't know. That's not how I thought about it. I went because my parents wanted me to. It didn't seem like a huge problem to me. Dad, there it was once more. It felt like a smack in the face each time he referred to that man as his father. I made an effort to remain composed, but I was no longer able to. You've been raised by me, Mason. Since you were 2 years old, I have supported you. Just a few years ago, that person appeared, and now he's your father. So what am I? Just a person who covers your expenses. I saw something flicker for the first time when he glanced at me, perhaps guilt. However, it vanished as quickly as it emerged. I didn't say you weren't my father. This is becoming far larger than it needs to be because of you. I don't believe I am. Despite my efforts to remain composed, I spoke loudly. Since you began hanging out with him, you've been acting as though I'm a complete stranger. You no longer cared about this family or spoke to me. Now it seems as though you are only here because you are at a loss for where to go. Do you no longer give a damn about us? He took a while to respond. He only sat and gazed at the table. He finally muttered, I didn't ask for any of this, okay? After what seemed like an eternity. I didn't request 2 fathers. All this turmoil is not what I asked for. I'm only attempting to make sense of things. That really got to me. To be honest, I hadn't considered it from his point of view. Really, how could I? I didn't pause to consider what this was doing to him since I was too preoccupied with my own feelings of betrayal. On the other hand, it did not justify his behavior. Mason, I get that. But that doesn't give you the right to treat others badly. Not the individuals who have supported you throughout your life, in particular. You can't ignore everyone because you don't understand them. He didn't answer. He continued to gaze at the table. He clenched his jaw as if he were attempting to suppress something. I waited for him to say anything at all, but he remained silent. I got up at last. What do you know? I've given up attempting to resolve this on my own. It's up to you if you continue to exclude me. However, I refuse to sit here and act as though nothing is wrong. I left him in the kitchen and went out. To be honest, I wasn't sure if I had the energy to debate anymore, and I didn't want to. I simply felt exhausted. I loved and reared this child as if he were my own, but he no longer wanted me in his life. I have to come to terms with that. It was tight for the following few days. When we did speak, it was uncomfortable and we seldom spoke at all. Small conversation. He never came to me to attempt to make things right, even though I continued waiting for him to do so. He might not have known how, or perhaps he didn't give a damn. I'm not sure. However, it became evident that our previous relationship had vanished. I was sitting on the couch one evening, simply reflecting on the events of the previous few months. The more I gave it more consideration, the more I understood that this wasn't only a phase or a difficult time. This was a decision. I couldn't change Mason's decision to choose his biological father over me, no matter what I said or did. I was aware that the current situation could not continue, but I was unsure of what to do next. With someone who didn't want to be here, I realized I couldn't continue to live in this place. Someone who no longer considered me to be his father. Something has to be done about it. However, what? I still didn't have an explanation for that portion. Things didn't really get any better after that conversation with Mason, so I realized something needed to happen. There was simply too much tension in the house. It felt like we were trudging through dense fog each time we passed one another. Awkward quiet. Avoid making eye contact. There was only this lingering sense of weight. I have to stop living that way. To be honest, he didn't appear to be able to either. Despite having too much history to ignore, we were like two strangers sharing a home. Nothing has improved in the weeks since our last meaningful talk. It had become worse, if anything. Mason went out later and occasionally didn't return home until the following day. And if I asked him where he had been, he would just mumble that I was with my dad or at a friend. It felt like a kick to the belly each time he uttered dad. That was what he used to call me. All I was now was Mike, his roommate. I was only there, and his bio-dad had replaced me in every important aspect. It was getting to the point where I felt like I had no other option, but I didn't want to make any snap judgments. Mason had no desire to be present. That much was clear. It was only convenient for him to stay. Nearer to his buddies, school, anything. By this time, I was essentially a roommate, not his dad. The more I considered it, the more I understood that I couldn't continue to act as though this would be resolved on its own. Perhaps it was time for me to make my decision now that he had made his dot. After Mason stayed out one more night, I made the decision that I needed to take action. When he arrived home early that morning, he stumbled into the kitchen, hardly noticing me and appearing to be half asleep. I followed him inside and halted him before he could vanish into his room once again. "Mason, we must speak," he groaned, obviously irritated. Now what? I inhaled deeply while attempting to remain composed. I can't continue like this, you see. You seldom ever visit me, and when you do, it seems as though I don't exist at all. Neither of us is finding this to be effective. He gave me a glance, weary but defensive. What the heck, are you throwing me out or what? When he said that, I realized it was precisely what I was thinking. Even though I hadn't intended to express it that way. Yes, I said slowly. It's probably time for you to go. It's obvious that you don't want to be here, and I don't want to keep acting as though nothing is wrong. His expression stiffened. That's it then? You're finished with me? I gave a headshake. Mason, I'm not done with you. Although I adore you, none of us is healthy in this circumstance. You said that you no longer consider me to be your father, and if you don't want to stay here, I can't make you. You have alternative choices. Your biological father, your mum. If you do not choose to be here, you are not required to be. After giving me a long look, he let out a caustic, bitter chuckle. Whoa, it looks like you're given up. His comments made me sting, but I kept it to myself. Mason, I'm not going to give up. I'll give you some room. You want it, don't you? He didn't respond. He appeared to be at a loss for words as he stood there down at the ground. In addition to his obvious anger, I noticed a glimmer of grief in his eyes. Perhaps he hadn't anticipated that I would truly order him to go. However, I couldn't continue to live this way, acting as though nothing was wrong when it wasn't. There was a long pause before he spoke. All right, I'll get my belongings. Without further comment, he turned and left the kitchen. I stood there for a long time, experiencing a wave of remorse and relief. Even though I knew I had made the correct decision, it didn't make things any simpler. I was telling my son, whom I had been raising since he was 2 years old, to go. What else could I do, though? I couldn't hang on to something that was already gone, and he didn't want to be here. Mason gathered his belongings throughout the course of the following several hours. Neither he nor I said anything. There was nothing else to say, yet it was tight and unpleasant. He filled a few of bags with his computer, books, clothing, and whatever else he could fit. Not all of it was taken by him. It was just what he needed. I assumed he would wind up at his mom's, but I didn't inquire where he was headed, or even his father's bio. In all honesty, I wasn't sure whether I wanted to know, therefore I wasn't sure. He stepped downstairs and paused at the door after finishing his packing. He avoided looking at me, simply remained there for a moment before saying anything. That's all then. I gave a nod. Yes, it's best for us both, in my opinion. I could feel he was keeping something back, but he didn't look at me yet. Perhaps anger or grief. I wasn't certain. All right, he whispered softly, then opened the door and left, and he was gone in an instant. After he went, I stood there for a while, only looking at the door. I kept expecting a wave of relief to pass over me, like if this burden had finally been removed, but it never materialized. Rather, comma. I sensed this void. It was too quiet in the home. Little one, Mason, wasn't out loud, but his presence had always permeated the room. The home felt lonely and chilly now without him. I was suddenly struck by it. This actually happened. He was gone, and I had no idea if he would return. The remainder of the day passed in a haze. I couldn't stop thinking about all the times we spent together when he was younger, instructing him on bicycle riding, assisting him with his assignments, bringing him to his very first ball game. He stared at me as if I were his idol, and I recalled all the times he called me Dad. Here we were now, he's gone, me alone myself, with everything between us shattered. I was exhausted as I plopped down on the couch that evening. Even though I completed what I had to, the pain persisted. I kept thinking about what I could have done, whether I had pushed him too far or whether I had done enough. Ultimately, though, I was aware of the reality. Mason had decided. I couldn't change the fact that he went with his biological father. I was forced to accept it, regardless of the pain. Mason had moved out a few weeks prior. That sense of emptiness persisted throughout the house even though everything was silent. I was attempting to move on, but Mason and Linda arrived at my place one day just as I was beginning to come to terms with the situation. I didn't even need to inquire as to their purpose. I could see it on their faces as soon as I opened the door. This visit was not going to be cordial. Mason wasted little time. He struck me with it as soon as they were inside. The college fund is necessary for me. I ought to have anticipated it. Mason still expected me to give him the money I had saved for him, despite all that had transpired. I wasn't even offended by the request. It was the right. As if he expected I would simply hand it over without question. Trying to remain calm, I let out a sigh. When you left this house, Mason, you lost that money. You've made it apparent that you no longer care about me. Why should I cover your college expenses? Standing beside him, Linda crossed her arms and dove in. You assured Mike. You're going to back out because you're angry, even though you promised to look after his future. It's not about your sentiments, it's about his education. I felt a fire ignite beneath me. No, Linda, respect is at issue here. It's been a while since Mason regarded me like a father. I'm done acting as though it doesn't hurt. He's made his decision. I believed that we were a family, therefore I saved that money. However, after everything that you two have done, he isn't receiving any money. Mason snorted, as if he was incredulous at what he was hearing. Are you implying that your love is conditional? I gave him a direct look. Yes, Mason, it is, as love is reciprocal. Additionally, you've demonstrated to me over the last 5 years that you don't care about me unless I'm making a payment. You have been deceiving me, concealing stuff, and now, as if none of it counts, you're here expecting me to simply give you the money. Not simply your college cash was gone. I no longer trust you. There was a moment of silence in the room. I saw a glimmer of something, but Mason's expression stiffened. Perhaps guilt. Anger, perhaps. It didn't alter what I stated, anyhow. Clearly annoyed, Linda shook her head. Mike, this is absurd. You are punishing him without cause. His future cannot be taken away from him because you are upset. I refuse to back down. He's not being punished by me. I'm defending myself. I've given this family my everything. I'm now being treated as though I don't exist at all. You can back Mason if you'd like. However, I'm finished. Mason lost his temper at that point. He hurried to the door while mumbling something beneath his breath and without a word. Before she followed him out, Linda gave me one more sneer. They vanished as soon as the door banged. I pondered whether I had made the proper choice for a while as I stood there looking at the door. But I knew in my heart that their purpose for being here was not to make things better. All they wanted was the cash. I learned that Linda and Mason's biological father were getting married a few days later through rumors. They had apparently been dating for a long time, long before Linda and I broke up. It didn't surprise me. Now everything made clear. The distance, the falsehoods, the coldness. Because Linda wasn't financially prepared to leave me, they had been keeping their relationship a secret. Therefore, they were plotting their future behind my back while I believed we had an opportunity to make amends. Mason, too. He was aware that he had been hiding that information from me the entire time, acting as though nothing was happening while they started their new small family. It felt like being struck repeatedly. I lost my wife first, then my son passed away. I was now discovering that all of the things I had been fighting for were false. From the beginning, they had been organizing their escape. I was the last to find out. Ultimately, I came to a significant realization. I wasn't wanted in Mason's life. The years we spent together meant nothing to him. The affection I showed him, or the things I did for him. I was only the one who was meant to cover the expenses. He had long since selected his actual father. Okay, no more.